Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my live streams. Today, I am joined by Tori from Twin Cities Comics. He is a facilitator, a comic book facilitator, and I am pleased to have him on the channel. Tori, it is good to see you. Thank you for joining me.
Appreciate you having me.
All right. So, Tori, can you tell people, I kind of gave them the name of the company just a moment ago. I talked a little bit about you on my pre-show that I do on Sunday night. I don't know if I did you justice, but can you tell the people just a little bit about, who you are and what Twin Cities Comics is all about? A moment ago, I talked a little bit about you on my pre-show that I do on Sunday night.
Sorry, 1 second.
I don't know if I did you justice, but
all right, sorry about that. So I own Twin Cities Comics. Been a comic book dealer since 2001. It was kind of a side business for quite a while I was in banking, and it got to be to the point where it's like, you know what? I don't really want to do two full-time jobs anymore. So I went full-time a number of years ago, and just trying to grow the business each year. It's to the point now where like you said, becoming a facilitator is kind of taken over. So less of a dealer, more of a facilitator. That's kind of changed over the years. When I first started, I didn't know what facilitation was either. And but I was a dealer through CGC for years, and they kind of approached me on doing it. So
very nice, very nice. So we are going to dig into a lot of that stuff over the course of this discussion that we're going to have. But I definitely appreciate you kind of teeing some of that stuff up for me. Before we get into the conversation, I want to say hello to a couple of people. Gorilla Grodd is here. Daniel is here. Perry Comics is in the house. It's good to see you, brother. Happy new comic book day to you as well. Undead Mousy is here. Santiago is in the house. I don't know how to say your name. THXLBX. Is here. Wolf Mode 88 is in the house. It is good to see all of you guys. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me. And again, we are going to dig into what is facilitation. This whole thing is about trying to help people understand what facilitation is and how facilitation can actually help comic book collectors. And I want to give a huge shout out to Big Will, who actually gave me this idea. And again, I want to give a huge thanks to Tori for agreeing to actually come on the show to help us to better understand facilitation. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, I definitely want to encourage you to do so that you can stay abreast of all the content that we release on a weekly basis. So, Tori, before we get into this conversation, one thing I want to talk about is that when we were doing our pre-conversations, we realized that we actually share a little bit of a history with one another. Can you share a little bit of what you shared with me when we talked previously?
Yeah, so Regie is a IFBB pro involved in the bodybuilding. I actually used to compete in men's physique as well, a little bit before him. But yeah, so we've never shared the stage before, but I know the struggles, man. I know the struggles of dieting on the road and everything else, and being up in your all your glory up on front of stage and stuff like that. It's funny because when the first time I did one, my mom's like, "Wait a second, are you going to be up there in the Speedos?" I'm like, "No, Mom. It's a little bit different." I don't think I would have done it. So yeah.
I come from a very conservative and religious family as well. And so I could never imagine being on stage in the banana hammock in front of my grandmother, because my grandmother and mother came to my first show, and I was like, there is no way I would ever do that kind of, and I mean, nothing against that. But I was like, I met a bikini competitor in a gym, and she was like, "You should do bodybuilding." And I looked at her, I was like, "I am not doing a banana hammock." And she's like, "No, they had this new thing called men's physique." That was the first time I'd heard of men's physiques. And I ended up competing about 8 months after that first conversation. So, and I haven't looked back at all. So it's actually been a really good run. And if you can see right over my shoulder is actually a sword that I won from one of the shows that I competed in and actually won a couple of years ago. So I'm trying to integrate this whole thing of bodybuilding and comic books into one, and doing it somewhat successfully. So thank you for sharing a little bit of that background with people. I think it was an interesting thing for me to learn. And so I always like to kind of share that stuff with folks. All right, so let's get into the very first question that I have for you. And the first question I have is, what exactly is facilitation? What is it, and what is their role within the context of comics?
Well, so CGC, they've been around since 2001. And I can't remember the exact year that they started rolling out their Signature Series program. So the Signature Series program is basically, hey, I've got a book just like you behind you, some of the books that you've got signed by Stan Lee over the years, or Todd McFarlane, or whoever your favorite artists or creators are. Well, CGC can't be at every convention. So if you're at a convention and CGC is there, you can bring your comic books. You can actually go right up to the CGC booth. They will walk you over with a witness to, Mike, Zach, or whoever you want. Get that stuff signed, walk it back with you, and submit it to CGC. You then have the coveted Signature Series program grade. Really, what it is it's kind of like a notary for comic books. That, hey, we physically saw this comic book being signed by this person. Well, because CGC can't be at all conventions, or because a person can't go to a convention, they decided, hey, why don't we have people become facilitators that can take books from people that either A, can't make it to a convention. I'll give you a perfect example. I got a buddy that lives in South Dakota, huge comic book fan. There's not a lot of comic book conventions in South Dakota. And even if there's a small one, they're not going to get your Neil Adams or your Greg Capullos or your Jim Lees, et cetera, to those. So he's kind of limited in what he could do. And even if they got those, it's such a small convention that CGC is not going to come out. So how does he get his favorite people to sign those books? Or maybe there's a celebrity that he wants to sign. CGC basically realized that, hey, we've got some people out there that want to get stuff signed. How do we help them? And that's really what CGC has done. CBCS also has something similar, where people that want to get theirs done through CBCS can go through one of their facilitators. So it's a way for the comic fan to get something signed that maybe they wouldn't have been able to.
Very helpful. So is a facilitator and a witness the same thing, or are there differences between the two?
Yeah, there are differences. So my role as a facilitator, I'm basically the company that acts as that. I don't witness the books that I bring to conventions. So there's...
Hey, Tori, we're having some technical difficulties. I think part of your response broke up, so we didn't hear that response at all.
Yeah, so as a facilitator, I don't witness my own books. So if I go to a show, I have one of two ways. I can either use a witness that CGC brings in, or I will bring my own witness. And if I've got 300, 400 books that I've got to get done at a convention, I'm going to bring my own witness because I can't be waiting on the witnesses at the CGC booth. So yes, they are different.
And is a witness a facilitator as well, or is that a completely, to some degree, separate activity and separate function?
Totally separate.
Totally separate.
So imagine this is the witness is the notary per se. They're the person that says, I witnessed this. The facilitator is the person that gets it all taken care of. They're bringing the books in, they're bringing the celebrities in, et cetera. But the actual witness is really the person that says, I physically witnessed these books get signed. The facilitator is the one that behind the scenes, we're collecting the books from people. We're bringing the books to the convention to get signed. So yeah, they are completely separate.
That's very helpful, because I think that was like part of the confusion is a witness a facilitator, and is a facilitator a witness? And what we're hearing is that those are two separate functions, which I think is great. In your initial response, you also made a comment about yellow label. A lot of people have asked questions. If I go get my book signed at a con, can I get a yellow label? Or if I have a book that is already signed, can I get a yellow label? The long and short of it is no. But can you put some more meat on that no for me? Like, better explain, how does someone actually get a yellow label, and why can they not get it if they already have a book that's been signed previously by someone else?
Right. So like I said, is the yellow label, and that's both for CBCS and for CGC. It's basically saying that we witnessed this signature. There are some companies out there like JSA and Beckett. They do something similar where they're going to put a hologram on your thing saying this is a witnessed signature. So in order to get a yellow label through CGC or CBCS, it has to be witnessed. It can't be something that I walk away from the CGC booth, get it signed, and bring it, even though you might have been 20 feet away. They have what's called a chain of custody. There has to be somebody, a witness, there at the entire time. The one big difference between CGC and CBCS is CBCS will allow you to get a book that's already been previously signed, encapsulated, but it's called a VSA. It's basically a verification signature program. But again, that's not yellow label. That's saying, hey, it's our professional opinion that we believe that this is an authentic autograph, but we weren't there for it.
And that's really for the purpose of like authenticity and authentication of that signature. That's essentially what we're talking about, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so Heroes to Icons has a question here. He says, what about those J. Scott Campbell special variants that he's seen around the world with yellow labels on, and that you can only get on his website? My belief is that he is essentially serving because he is the creator and the signer, he is sending them directly to CGC, and they are allowing him to essentially authenticate that it is his signature. I think that's how he's able to do it. But Tori, you may be able to, again, better explain that process, how J. Scott Campbell is able to do that.
Yeah, so that is correct. As an artist can actually certify their own signature because they're saying, yes, I did do this. J. Scott Campbell does that where he will sign items, send them to CGC. CGC grades them, and they're basically taking J. Scott Campbell at his word that they are his signatures. There's an actual form that he has to fill out, and then they send that back. There's also something where a lot of my clients will get a sketch by an artist, and they will actually say, hey, for instance, we'll just say J. Scott Campbell. So let's say somebody gets a hold of J. Scott Campbell and says, hey, I would like you to do a sketch for me. He does a sketch. He then sends it to me as the facilitator because then they want to get that signed by a celebrity. So there's a number of people out there, but yes, the short of it is that an artist does have a little bit of leeway because they're saying, yes, I did in fact sign this, and then they have a form that's actually they sign that says, yes, I did 10 of these or 20 or however many they signed.
Yep. And RB3 is asking a question here. I'm not sure I fully appreciate it, but I think what you were just describing is that J. Scott Campbell does a sketch on a blank cover, for example, or a remark on a regular cover. He
Correct.
Sends it to you as the facilitator. You are now in possession of that book. And then you facilitate getting that very same book from J. Scott Campbell signed by a celebrity on behalf of your actual customer. That's what I heard. Yes?
Yes, correct. It can actually be other artists as well,
yes.
Or it can be celebrities.
Yeah, so, I was just trying to stick with your specific example, but yeah, but essentially you are now in possession of an authenticated sketch from J. Scott Campbell because you received it from him, and now you can get it signed by whoever, right? And then you can submit it on behalf of me, right, to CGC right. for them to put the yellow label on it.
Yes, that's correct. Now, to be fair, you're not going to just be able to call up J. Scott Campbell and get a sketch.
But oh no, we're on first name basis. No. We're go ahead.
But there are a number of artists out there that you can contact directly through their Facebook or any other social media, or maybe you meet them at a convention and say, hey, I'd like you to do a commission for me, but they don't have time to do it at the convention. They can then take that home with them, get them that sketch cover signed, send it to us so that we have that chain of custody. And then we can take it to the next show and get it signed by another artist. Or one of the things people will do is called a jam piece. I'll get a small remark by Humberto Ramos, and then I will take it to the next show and I'll get a small remark by Mike Zeck. And then I'll take it to another show and maybe I'll get two of them. That's a little bit different, but it's the same thing, a sketch or a signature. So we can take one book from one show that we get somebody to sign or sketch, and then take it to another show and get another person. And we can do that. It gets a little technical, but we can do that as many times as a person would like within reason.
Very helpful. And Joseph is asking the question if this is Twin Cities Comics, and yes, indeed it is. It is Tori from Twin Cities Comics. Joseph, maybe he's familiar with you. I'm not quite sure. You mentioned that CGC basically came about in around 2001. How long after CGC started did they start the role of the facilitator? Like, put another way, how long has facilitation by companies and individuals outside of CGC been in existence?
I can't tell exactly, but I know going back to as long ago as 2003, they had the witness portion of it. I want to say that they kind of switched from a strict witness to the kind of facilitator deal in 2004, 2005, but don't quote me on that. But I do remember that in about 2003, that a dealer could basically sign up as a witness, and then they could go to a show and witness it. But then at that point, you didn't have the separate witness facilitator designations. And I think at some point they realized, well, maybe there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. We want to make sure that the person as a facilitator who is running a business, that there's no propensity to commit fraud or anything like that. So
Yep.
that's why they now have a witness, which is an independent person that says, hey, I witnessed this books for this facilitator.
Yep, that's very helpful. So you've touched on a lot of things already, but I want to circle back and just again set the table. In general terms, what are some of the services that are pretty standard when it comes to facilitation? And again, we've already touched on some of them, so I don't know that we need to go into detail on things you've already spoken about, but I'm not quite sure if there's some other services that you haven't mentioned already.
The biggest is just obtaining signatures, and that can be from a comic creator, that can be from a celebrity. So for instance, you want to get something signed, you send it to a facilitator because you know that facilitator is going to C2E2, or that facilitator is going to San Diego Comicon, or what have you. You also have facilitators that say, hey, I've got a private signing with such and such coming up. So you can do that. The second thing is that you can actually do sketch commissions. So it's not as big a part of our business, just because the business of sketches has kind of changed. But it used to be something where somebody would send us a blank and say, hey, can you get on Humberto Ramos's sketch list? So we would go up to Humberto and say, hey, I've got a customer that would like to get a Black Cat on Amazing Spider-Man blank. We would then facilitate that. Once it's done, we go pick that up, and it's the same thing. Then in that situation, that yellow label, instead of just saying signed by Ramos, it will say signed and sketched by Humberto Ramos. So that's really the biggest things. A little different that we do is we don't deal just in comic books. So people can send us Funko Pops, they can send us posters, they can send us manuscripts, action figures, you name it, because we do a lot of stuff with celebrities. But specifically speaking about facilitation, it's pretty much just that. I got something signed, or excuse me, I got something I wanted signed or sketched. You send it to the facilitator that can do that for you.
That's very helpful. Thank you for that. So I know that facilitators also do a lot of like private signings, right? And oftentimes, at least my impression is that these private signings are done by the creator who doesn't attend a lot of cons, or might be a homebody, or maybe older and isn't able to travel as a younger person might, right? So, and one person that comes to mind is like John Romita Sr. I actually used a facilitator to get this book right here signed by John Romita. Are private signings pretty typical for facilitators, or is it really dependent upon that facilitator's familiarity with the creator or their relationship with the creator? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's a number of reasons that you're going to have a private signing. The first is, like you said, maybe somebody's older and doesn't travel a lot. John Romita Sr. is one of those. Before Stan's passing, we actually went out and had some signings at Stan Lee's residence last year when he stopped doing conventions. But then you also have some people like Todd Mcfarlane. Todd does either 1 or 2 signings a year, and he does them at his office. And he does it just because when he goes to a convention, He wants to meet as many people as possible. And if you have a dealer that's coming in that wants to get 200 or 300 books signed by Todd Mcfarlane, he's just not able to do it at that. So you have some private signings that are just based on necessity. Then you have some private signings with creators that is just, hey, I contact any number of creators and say, hey, I'm going to be bringing 100 books to you. I don't want to stand in your line. Can we set something up? And it's basically, hey, I know that I've got guaranteed time with such and such an artist or such and such a writer, and I can guarantee that I can get that done. Because if I had to stand in line for 10, 15, 16 people in any given day, I might not be able to get everything done. And as a facilitator, we really have to make sure that if you're sending stuff to us, we get everything done at a show. Yep. And then you have some that, especially for us, we do a lot of private signings with celebrities. The celebrities just aren't going to go to a convention either because they're too expensive, they don't have the time, or maybe they just, it's not something that they want to do. So.
Right. Very helpful. That's a very helpful response. So thank you for that. One thing that I wanted to touch on, you kind of talked about CGC versus CBCS a little bit earlier in the conversation. Is it pretty typical for a facilitator to work with one or both of those particular grading companies? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can't talk as much for CBCS because I don't know about that, but CGC does actually have within their facilitator agreement that if you're going to be a facilitator for CGC, you cannot facilitate for any other grading companies. I think it's two reasons. Number one is you're basically entering into a contract with them that you're going to be promoting their company. And they don't want to have it where if I'm a car dealership and I'm selling Ford and I'm selling Chevys, am I going to drift somebody over to Ford because Ford this month has a better deal for me? Yep. And next month you go to Chevy. So I think that they just don't want to do that. So I can tell from CGC that's the way it is. For CBCS, I think it's the same, but I can't guarantee that. So in reality, most people are going to choose one or the other. Plus, on top of that, it becomes personal preference for a creator, or not a creator, excuse me, but a collector, that they may choose one over the other, and they're going to start to work with somebody. So a large majority of our customers have a preference of CGC, but there are some times where they have to go to CBCS because perfect example is that signature verification that CGC at this point doesn't have. So maybe they have to use that. But generally speaking, it's kind of like, are you a Chevy guy or are you a Ford guy, or do you like Nike or Reebok? Same thing. Do you like CGC or do you like CBCS? So, yeah.
Got it. So we may be having a little bit of problem with your microphone. So hopefully the signal will clear up in just a second. But I want to give a huge shout out to Joseph for that super chat. I definitely appreciate all of those acts of kindness. One last question that I have for you in like this first part, which I'm calling like the foundational part, is how do people typically go about finding a facilitator? To the point that you just made about people tend to have a preference, and facilitators for one reason or another tend to work with one grading company versus another. How do people typically go about finding a facilitator? Is it through the con's website? Is it by searching? Like, how do people typically do it? Because I've only worked with one facilitator, and that's how I found her. Is I was going to the con, went to the con's website, I saw that she was facilitating. I reached out to her and had a great conversation. So I'll pause to see what your thoughts are on that.
The first is just like you said, sometimes the convention will have somebody there. The second is CGC and CBCS both have chat boards, so they can go on there. CGC will actually refer people. So if you want to go to a convention that they're not at, they will contact CGC. And CGC knows what facilitators will be there. And then you can just kind of do searches online, whether it be Facebook or just a regular Google search and look for it. So,
and is there typically one facilitator per grading company per con? Is that typically how it works?
No, you might have, for some of the larger conventions like New York, you might have every facilitator around go to it. But you are correct in that some of the smaller ones, I'm in the Midwest. I'm not going to go to a small convention in upstate New York because it's not convenient for me, and I might not do a lot of business there. But for me to go to a convention here in Minneapolis, where I've got, I don't have to drive far, I don't have to fly, I don't have to spend any money at a hotel, I might go there even if I'm only doing a couple of books.
Yep. Which makes perfect sense. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So I want to, I don't know that you've told us how long you've actually been a facilitator, because we talked a little bit about CGC came out around 2001. They kind of started facilitation maybe around 2004, 2003, 2005 timeframe through some various iterations. How long have you been a facilitator?
Well, I've been a facilitator in the sense that I've taken other people's books since 2010, I believe.
Okay.
But I was getting stuff signed for my company to resell before that. But since 2009 or 10, somewhere in there is when I started to take customers' books to get signed for them.
Very nice. I had a third-party grading service on the channel recently, and one of the things that he talked about was how he actually did some special training in order to be a grader, which makes sense, right? Because you're grading people's books, you should have a certain amount of expertise. I honestly wasn't sure if there were any kind of classes or certifications or any of that kind of stuff that you needed to do as a facilitator. So I'm curious, is there, and then what does that actually look like?
No, there's no classes. The only thing is we do have to pass a background check. When we're dealing with high value collectibles, they want to make sure that whoever's facilitating on their behalf, doesn't have a criminal record and things like that. So that's the only thing. But on the same token, is they're not just going to let anybody be a facilitator. You've got to have references. You have to have been in the business for a while. It has to make sense for somebody to do that. It's real just, does the person make sense and do they have the expertise needed to do it? But there's no classes or anything like that.
That's very helpful. Certainly for the folks that are in the chat here, if you guys have questions for Tori, type those in, try to put them in caps so that I can make sure that I pay attention to them. But I want to try as best I can to get some of you all's questions asked. To that point, my buddy Brian Parent actually reached out to me when he heard that you were going to be on the channel. And one of the questions that he was asking about was, is it okay for him to identify where on a comic, for example, he wants someone to sign? And adding to that, can he make requests for the book to be signed in a certain color ink so that it complements the cover? Is that doable through a facilitator?
Yeah, it is. I would say 9 times out of 10, we can get stuff done like that. We can't guarantee it though, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. If you have a book that you want signed in silver Sharpie by Jim Starlin, it's not going to happen. He's actually allergic to the solvent in metallic Sharpies. So
really?
Yeah. But we try to do our best. So while we say that we can't guarantee signature placement or color, we do our best. However, there's one thing that will allow people to be much a better chance in that, and that's how a book is prepped. So in the vernacular, I guess, is we call them window bags. So what we do is we actually take a bag and a board, and you'll use blue painter's tape, or there are some blue pre-cut windows out there, and you're going to actually cut a window in that board, a bag and board, of where you want that to be signed. So if you want it to be in a specific area, you're prepped like that. It's the only place for somebody to do that. Now, the problem is that, and I'm not going to name names, but especially with some of the celebrities, sometimes somebody thinks they know best, but there are some creators that are like, look, I made that cover. I want to sign it in this specific place, or no, silver's not going to look good there. So as a facilitator, we try our best to do that. We can't guarantee it. And I'm not going to tell somebody that has a silver pen in their hand that's about to sign it, and they say, no, silver is going to look better. I'm not going to grab it out of their hand and say, no, this person wants gold, or they're not going to do it. That's just not professional, and we can't do that. But I'd say 99% of the time, we can get it in the right color and the right placement, but we can't guarantee it.
That is super helpful. I have to tell you, you hit on so many wonderful points in that response. I think the fact that you knew that Jim Starlin was allergic to the metallics, I think that that's impressive because it tells me that you know your customers, right? And someone actually in the comments here actually co-signed that who met him last year. And Jim Starlin is, I'm also a big fan of his, so I really dig that. The window bags, I think was a wonderful comment because a lot of people are wondering how best to prepare their books to be signed. Can you take a moment and actually walk us through the process of engage? What does the whole process look like from the moment I find out that you're going to be at a con and I decide that I want you to get my Thanos quest signed by Jim Starlin, and I reach out to you, I send you my book? Like, what does that process look like? Can you kind of high step us through that?
Sure. So the first is that if you're a new client to any facilitator, you're going to want to obviously reach out to them and not just send a book, because hey, you want to make sure that they're actually going to a show, etc. But I'm going to give you a little bit of example from somebody that's actually used us before. They are going to see that we're going to C2E2 or whatever convention. They're going to look at the guest lists. And they're going to say, I want books signed by these 3 or 4 people. So they're going to take those books, they're going to prep those books, and they're going to do 2 things. The first is, if it's a raw book, meaning it's not graded, on the back of the backing board, they're going to put all of their contact information, their name, address, email, cell phone, etc. 2 reasons. Number 1, if you send me a copy of Thanos Quest and somebody else sends me one, I want to make sure that the correct book gets to the correct person. So they're labeled like that. The second thing is, I as a facilitator have to fill out the forms. I've got all your contact information there. On the back of the backing board as well is where you can do the same thing. I want it signed by not only Jim Starlin, but I want it signed by these 2 or 3 people. Maybe one of them is at C2E2 and one of them is at Dallas Fan Expo. They're going to put that on there so we know which conventions we're bringing those books to. And then on top of that, any special requests. I want this one in silver, or I want this one along a chest, or whatever. And then on the front of the book, like we talked about, you can create your own window bag. Some people feel confident to do that. Some people don't. In fact, if you do a Google search on how to window bag comics, there's actually a link to a thread on the CGC boards that actually has pictures on how to do it. And all you're going to do is you're going to put that where you want them to sign it. Sometimes if you're having something signed by 10 or 15 people because you're doing a cast book or you're doing all the creators on a book, you're going to do the window around the entire comic. So once you do that, you send it off to us. You can then at that point either use our CGC account, or if they have their own CGC account, again on the back of that backing board, here's my CS number. Please put it under my account. And this is the type of grading. Do I want it modern? Do I want it fast tracked? Do I want to add pressing? If it's an older book or more expensive book, do you want it to be standard or do you want it to be express, etc.? The more information you give us, the easier it is for us to get everything done the way that you want it.
That is super helpful. I also, when you talked about using either your CGC account or the customers, I wasn't even aware that that was an option, because I think if you use mine, I actually have visibility into where it is in the process. But if you use yours, then I don't have that insight. So I think it's nice that you actually offer that, because I don't know if that's standard for a lot of facilitators.
It is just because of the fact of 2 things. Not everybody has a CS account. Maybe it's because they're not really a huge comic fan, but they really, one comic that they read when they were a kid changed their lives. Who knows? And they want to get that one signed. Maybe that's the only comic they're ever going to get signed and graded. Why do they need their own account number through CGC then? They really don't. But it's just personal preference. Some people are like, look, Tori, you take care of it. You do everything because I don't have the time to mess with it. I can't go on and track the books anyways, etc. So if I have a question, we contact you. We usually tell people kind of a typical turnaround time for a book so that they know, hey, if you're submitting a book to us today and it's getting signed this weekend, Typical turnaround time is X, could be 8 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. So they know that 8 weeks from now, if they don't have that book, then they just contact us and say, hey, Tori, can you look up this? Or, hey, can you look up what the status of this is? And then we can look for them. That way, we're kind of giving them a little bit of a ETA of when they should know that they're going to be getting their items back by.
Yep. One other question for you. And this is one that just kind of popped into mind, because as you're talking about the things that you're doing, what I picture you is sitting in a room full of other people's comics right now, and like storage bins and things like that, right? I'm guessing you have some kind of insurance and coverage to protect all of those books that are stored wherever they're stored, and while you're in transit to a con or a private showing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, we do. We have a $2 million collectibles insurance policy that covers not only the stuff that we have that's in our stock, but also all of our customers' items.
That right there, I'm gonna tell you, that gives people a lot of confidence, because to your point, whether someone has one comic or 10,000 comics, more than likely that comic means something to them. And to know that that comic is protected when it's out of their possession and viewing area, I think gives people a lot of assurance. So thank you for that answer. I actually, again, that was one that just kind of popped into my head, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. And so I appreciate you giving that answer. So
on that, just the fact that as a facilitator, we can't guarantee grades. And this is something that some people don't realize. If I have a book that's already graded in a blue label book, let's say it's a 9.8 copy of Thanos 13. It's the first appearance of the Cosmic Ghost Rider. And they send it to us to get Donnie Cates on it. There is no guarantees that that book will come back a 9.8. And I'm going to give you an example. We treat everybody's book the same way that we treat our own books. But I had a book that was already signed by about 3 or 4 cast members of the Vampire Diaries. We had 4 copies of it. We brought it to get signed by Ian Somerhalder. During the signing, Ian is signing and he coughs. He actually got some spit on a book. Now, we had a piece of, I think it was, I don't know if it was tissue paper or whatever, and we dabbed it off. But that book went from a 9.8 to a 9.0 because of water damage. So there are some things that out of, hey, stuff happens. I've also, unfortunately, it was one of the worst things that I saw. I saw a creator, and I'm not going to name names, but when they were signing, they were wearing a watch, and their watch cut the front cover of a book. Luckily, it wasn't an expensive book. But that's something that a facilitator can't guarantee, but that insurance does cover if, God forbid, my office, gets destroyed in a fire, or if we're traveling and while we're traveling, something is stolen out of a car or something like that. Those kind of things do cover. But people have to be very careful, because I tell people, if you've got a book that is a 9.8 that you would honestly die if it came back as a 9.6, don't send it to me, because there are no guarantees. Now, we like to think that we, are one of the best in the business on how we handle people's books, but there are instances just like that, a book getting spit on, that we can't control, and it's out of our hands.
Yep. I think that's a great answer. And then I think even beyond that, right, there is no guarantee that when that book goes to CGC that they're going to grade it the exact same way that they did before. Like, CGC has been on the channel a couple of times, and we've talked about the fact that that grading is a mixture of art and science. And so, as an example, this book right here, I actually purchased this book as a 7.5. Got it signed by Stan and John Romita. John Romita Sr. was through a facilitator. The book was then pressed and cleaned, came back at a 7.0. And I lost a half a grade. And the truth is I'm actually okay with that. I was disappointed initially, but then when I realized that I actually had an opportunity to stand across the table from Stan Lee and get his signature, and then I also got John Romita's, that half grade didn't mean anything in comparison to that experience. But I think you raise an excellent point that if there is the potential for grade to be lost, and that is meaningful to you, then you may not want to go down that path. I think that's a very good point to have people hear.
Yep.
Very good. Very good. So I know that a lot of facilitators will work year round, but I know that there are certain times of the year that get really busy. And that typically is con season for a lot of people. Again, CGC was on here the other day and they were like, con season is coming up. And so I'm curious, how many cons did you do last year? And then how many are you planning to do this year?
Last year, I think we did about 30. We did some conventions that were on the same weekend. We're actually doing one of those this year where we're going to Planet Comicon for one day and then going right to Anaheim for WonderCon. So we do have some that we've done that. And then there are some times where we will have witnesses at 2 different conventions in the same weekend. For instance, we just had Pensacon. I was there with a witness, and then one of my witnesses was up at Portland. Unfortunately, he was only there for a day, so we couldn't take a lot of stuff, and it was only there to get 2 or 3 people. So as a company, we did about 30, 32 last year, I think. This year, we're probably going to be doing a few less than that, but we also have a lot more private signings coming up with celebrities. So to get to your point, yeah, there is a convention season, but that doesn't affect us as much because we do a lot of those private signings with some celebrities that could happen at any point of the year. And those we'd actually prefer to do those in some of those down months so that we're kind of spreading everything out a little bit.
And then how does someone go about finding out what your con and private signing session schedule looks like? I could not say that again if I tried, but how does someone get that information?
There's a couple different things. So we are on the CGC boards, and we do have our convention schedule on there. And then as a convention gets closer, we will actually put a specific thread up for specific conventions. We'll also put that up there if we have a specific private signing. The next private signing that we have is with Alden Ehrenreich, who played the young Han Solo in the Solo, a Star Wars movie. The other ways that we have is that we do have a Facebook page, and we'll post a lot of that there. But a majority of our stuff, just because we've built up a book of business over the last couple of years, is that we do have a email solicit. And we use MailChimp because it's the easiest out there. We try not to spam people. So even during the convention season, we're averaging maybe 1 email per week, except during the large ones like during San Diego Comic-Con, because things change quite a bit. And that's really the bulk of it. We have pretty much everybody who follows us on all of our social media platforms also is on that, because that way they can know real quick. They don't have to be on Facebook. They don't have to be on Instagram, Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. It just goes to their email, and they're going to look through that. So they're going to see all of the conventions that we are already signed up for. They can then look, because we put all of the links to the guest lists right there. So you know what conventions that we're going to, and you know who's going to be attending to there. Then we also put on what private signings that we have, specific dates if we have one, or we might just say, we've got a signing coming up with somebody, it's going to be in the fall. That's the best way to do. So people will email us all the time just to ask to be put on that mailing list.
Very nice. And so a huge shout out again to Joseph Taylor for the super chat. I definitely appreciate that. So let's before we get to the cons that you have coming up, I wanted to touch on cost, because I know cost is always a factor, right? Can you give us some idea of what costs you charge for the services that you provide? And I don't know if the costs are different between a con and a private screening. I don't know if they're different if it's a celebrity versus a comic book creator, but cost is always a factor. So can you give us some insight there?
Sure. So there is a difference between comic book creators and celebrities. The biggest difference is a celebrity is going to have a much, much longer line in most cases. Plus, it's very specialized. For comic book creators, I might be going up to somebody and having 50 books, whereas if I'm going up to a celebrity, I might only have 1. So it's almost like if I've got to stand in line for a celebrity for 1 book, and both myself and my witness are there for half an hour, 15 minutes, whereas I can go to a comic book creator and get 50 of them done at the same time. There's that difference. So for 95% of comic book creators, we charge a $5 fee per signature over and above whatever the comic book artist or writer charges. So we actually have a spreadsheet that we manage so that when we go to a convention, we know that this person is charging this. Jim Lee right now charges $30. Robert Kirkman was $30. Marv Wolfman is $20, etc. So whatever they charge, we add $5 on top of that. Now that's just for the facilitation on the signatures. There are some people that we do charge more just because they're either more rare or we know that they're going to be a little bit harder to get. And then we're looking at maybe $10, but we really don't go above $10 for any comic book creators, unless, like you said, it's a private signing. Those do have different fees, because if I'm at a convention, I know that I got to pay for a flight and a hotel regardless. But if I've got to go to a private signing for just one person and I'm incurring a flight, hotels, etc., just for that one person, I do have to cover those costs. For celebrities, about 95% of celebrities, we charge $25 per signature. There are going to be some situations where if somebody is sending us more than 5 books for the same celebrity, we are going to cut them a break, because now we're not there just for just one item. But then when you have your A-list celebrities, your Chris Hemsworths, your Chris Evans, your Josh Brolin's, things like that, we are going to charge a little bit more just because they are harder to get. And then you have some that if it's a private signing, it's specifically based on what we're being charged. And again, so for instance, Chris Evans, at the last show we had with him, I think he was $200. So we were at $250 for comic books. However, like I said, we don't just take comic books. So we had people sending us full-size shields. Guess what? It's a pain in the butt to have to carry that around. A lot more space, so we are going to charge more for that, but rightly so.
But let's be honest, a shield is really cool. A Captain America shield is awesome, and a signed one, that's super awesome.
Some point, remind me, I will actually email you a copy of the shield that I've got. Anybody that's in the MCU that I've ever had a signing with has signed it so far. And on top of that, I've got Chadwick Boseman on it. I think it's the only shield in the universe that he's signed, because you can't go up to him at a movie premiere with your big shield. I happened to meet him at San Diego Comicon a couple years ago and got it signed. So I've got it signed by a pretty good bunch of the cast of the MCU right now.
Dude, that is awesome. That is awesome. I do want that photo. I will send you a message after this is over.
But that shows that I'm a collector as well. This isn't just a business. It's a passion for me. I mean, I really enjoy the business as well.
How long have you been collecting?
Oh boy, the first comic book that I bought was Wolverine #1 back in the 80s. Now that was the first one that I bought with my own money. Yeah. I know that even before that, I would get, my parents to buy me, the old spinner racks at, I had the Transformers and the old G.I. Joes and stuff like that. But I remember the specific first one that I bought was Wolverine #1. And I remember the comic shop in Appleton, Wisconsin. It's still there, and stuff. And then I took a break, kind of like what we talked about, you get into high school and you're in sports and, girls and things like that. So I was out of it for quite a while from high school and college. And then I got back into it because I was working at a mortgage company, and a buddy of mine brought comics on New Comic Book Day on a Wednesday. And he brought these in, and it was right around the time that Witchblade and Darkness and stuff was coming up with Image and Top Cow. And I remember reading The Darkness, the first issue of that, and I thought it was a really cool idea, a really cool story. And then I'm like, what? I got a whole bunch of comic books at home, and kind of like you, I started selling my old comic books that I wasn't really into, kept the ones that I did, bought a comic collection. Off, and that's how it started. So, yeah.
Very, very nice. I'm always curious how people get started. So is it safe for me to assume that you're a Marvel guy with that shirt and with that Wolverine 1 being your first purchase? Is that safe?
Yeah, make mine Marvel. Now I do like DC, but honestly, some of my favorite stuff to read right now is indie. You know, I'm a big Image fan. I'm a Walking Dead fan. I remember buying Walking Dead #1. Wish I hadn't sold it when I did because whatever. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to sell it for $200, and now look at it. But I actually do read a lot of the smaller stuff as well. But if you're gonna say, are you a Marvel or a DC guy? Yeah, mine would be Marvel. So.
What are you reading right now? What's on your desk that you're actually reading right now, if you can tell us? And it doesn't matter whether it's Marvel or one of the independents. I'm just curious, like what are you into?
Right now, actually, I'm still reading The Walking Dead. And over the last 2 or 3 months, I haven't done a lot because I actually moved in December. I live in Minnesota, moving in the middle of the winter, don't ever do it type thing. So I moved out of one place December and moved into the other place in January. I didn't have time. Everything was packed away. So I'm actually catching up on The Walking Dead right now. And Die, Die, Die is actually really cool. So.
Okay, I've heard a lot of good things about that. I haven't picked that one up. I actually just finished not many days ago reading Marvel 1. I actually went back and read Marvel 1 and actually enjoyed it. Then I read Captain America 1. I've been reading some of that older stuff that I realized that I never actually read. And no, I don't own those. I'm actually reading them through Marvel Unlimited, which is a wonderful resource, right? Because you can read some awesome stuff for a couple of bucks, and it's fantastic. So very cool. So what are the next couple of cons that you're going to be at if people are looking for you?
So the next one we're going to be at is Emerald City Comicon, which is not this weekend, but the following weekend. Just so that people are aware, obviously as a facilitator, I'm leaving for a convention on a Wednesday afternoon. I can't really get your books Wednesday morning and have time to prep everything. So we usually tell people the latest we need stuff by is the Monday before a convention. If they can get it to us about a week beforehand, that's better. So that's the next one that we have coming up. The weekend after that, we actually fly out to LA on Wednesday, I think, is when we're going to be signing with Alden. It's not set in stone yet, but I think that's when that's going to be. Then we go to C2E2. Following week after that, we go to Kansas City for Planet Comicon and then to WonderCon. I think we have a week off then, but I'm not sure. And then I'm at Star Wars Celebration and Salt Lake City back to back.
Very nice, very nice. So, where can people? Because you kind of teased some of the social media stuff that you guys are on right now. Can you give us a rundown of where people can find out more information about you, and more importantly, where can people get in touch with you if they are indeed interested in using your services for some of the cons that you just mentioned?
So the easiest way is just to email us. Our email address is sales, S-A-L-E-S, at twincitiescomics.com. Right now, our website is down. It's been down actually since because of the move. We're trying to work on a new website right now because I've actually got some stuff that we're working on that I can't talk about quite yet. So, but right now, the easiest way is to email us. You can also find us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/twincitiescomics. Those are the two easiest ways. Facebook just seems to have the broadest reach right now, and email is the easiest. I will say that if people are on the CGC boards, they can contact us through that. However, we don't really use the messenger system in that very often, but you can find information on the CGC chat boards. But realistically, if you want to get a hold of us, send us an email. We check that a lot more regularly than we will the messages on the chat boards.
Very good. So what I will do, especially in response to Ruben asking the question here, I'm actually going to put your email address and also the website in the description of this video to make it easy for people to find it. I try to do that if I can remember, but I will definitely make it happen because I want people to be able to reach out to you to find you. And I just want to be clear, no Instagram, because I am a fan of the IG. So I just want to make sure that I cannot find you on Instagram.
We are on Instagram,
okay,
but we don't post hardly ever. And I'll tell you the reason. I'll tell you the reason why. For brand recognition, Instagram and Twitter are great, but for purely a business standpoint, for us, we've seen that it's so much easier. Messenger on Facebook is super easy. To me, to slide into our DMs, type stuff. It's just like I don't. I would rather have two easy platforms than have to manage 8 or 9 different things, because hey, Twitter's got its, its place. Instagram definitely has its place, especially for the brand recognition. But realistically, for us, what we found is just a majority of our customers are either going to use Facebook. I mean, it still is the largest out there for us, and people are going to contact us via email.
Well said.
Yeah, but most of our actual customers come via word of mouth. So, like you said, there's not a lot of people that even know that this exists. There are, how many people watch all of the Marvel movies just right there? How many of them actually own comic books at home? And I would say maybe, what, 1% knows that this is something that you can actually do. So when we have signings, somebody will do a search for, God knows what, and they'll see that we've had a signing, like we had a signing with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and people are like, oh my God, you could actually send stuff in and get signed by Arnold? Yeah, but people don't know about it.
That's one of the things that I've talked about a lot on the channel is that it would be great if the folks that are putting movies out and TV shows do something to raise the awareness of like the source material. Because I think if we can get people that are sitting at home watching all these TV shows and going to the movies to funnel them into the hobby and just all of the services, to your point, that are associated with the hobby, I think that would serve the market, the comic book market, extremely well. But one can only hope for some of those things, But Tori, I want to thank you for taking the time out to actually join the channel. I reached out to you last week and was like, hey, so I'm Reggie. and we had a wonderful conversation as I was driving to a comic shop. And I just want to thank you for being receptive and responsive to me reaching out to you. I think that this conversation goes a long way towards helping people to understand facilitation, the role that it plays, how you can tap into it, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for taking time out to actually join us here on the channel.
You are very welcome. I appreciate it.
All right. So I want to thank everyone who is in the chat. I see my buddy Chris from We Love Comics just joined. I want to thank all you guys for hanging out with us just a little bit. My hope is that you walk away with a better understanding of facilitation and how you can actually tap into this great service to obtain signatures and remarks and sketches and all that good stuff from the creators that you are a fan of. Again, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, I definitely want to encourage you to do so that you can stay abreast of all the content that I release on a weekly basis. Take care.